about all right, you did a launch yesterday. And so maybe you could just chat a little bit about that. We could see if any folks were on that and if we have any comments, and maybe we talk about it later, but let you take the floor.
Okay, great. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, yesterday we launched Unify, the next feature set within the manage module, where we're essentially leveraging RMM, existing RMM agents, taking device side information, correlating it with the SaaS account information, and giving our MSPs one unified view of the user. And we launched only to partners yesterday. We're launching to the rest of the universe next Wednesday when we're out in Vegas. And the feedback has been phenomenal, better than I even anticipated. And the team did a great job, getting ready and getting this out on time. So I just wanted to ask, did anyone, I know we've got a lot of loyal fans here on this Saa y MSP call. Did anyone not see the launch yesterday? Ben was there. Come on. You weren't there?
No, I totally thought it was today. And I looked at the LinkedIn, I was like, oh crap, sandwiches. And I was like, oh.
Wow.
Maybe I'll get the recording. I know, I'm the worst. It's like,
okay. So looks like we definitely have some folks that missed it. So we'll go through the fifth wall presentation today, and then we'll come back and highlight some of the high points, if you will, of the launch yesterday, and see if folks have questions.
Jim, was that a play on words? Go through the fifth wall? Did you kind of premeditate that whole thing?
As I was saying it, I kind of figured it was going pretty well, so I just went with it. But
yeah,
it wasn't necessarily on purpose when I started the sentence.
Yeah. So I have this Laurel and Hardy wreath, like from Blazing Saddles. Is that what if anybody remembers?
Oh boy, Mel Brooks in the house now.
Yeah, exactly. I figure you might know that shit. Okay, so we've got the folks back from Fifth Wall. We had Will last week, and we'll certainly let them reintroduce themselves. But I'm excited. Reed, thanks for joining us. I know that Dustin couldn't make it, but maybe you could give us a quick overview of yourself, Reed, and sure. Being one of the founders of Fifth Wall, and then we'll get into today's presentation. I know last week there's some things that Dustin wanted to recap. I'll bring those up momentarily, but some quick intros and then we'll get into it.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Hi, everyone. My name's Reed Wellock. I am the president of Fifth Wall. I was part of the original team when we started back in 2016. So I best describe myself as a cyber insurance nerd. There aren't many of us, but I'm one of the proud and few. So yeah, I've been doing this for the better part of 7 years, working with thousands of retail agents for many of those years, which is a really frustrating endeavor because agents don't really understand this very well. Still to this day, it's a struggle, and have been just delighted as we've gotten to know the MSP channel better, more and more, working through Wes Spencer, Dustin Bolander, and just spreading the good word, helping educate folks, helping them leverage what is inevitably laying in their laps, and glad to be here.
Cool. How many MSPs are you guys working with now, give or take?
About 700 now.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. Pretty awesome stuff. And then, Will, real quick for the folks that may not have been on last week, yourself, and then I'll set the stage.
Yeah. So put real simply, I was one of those retail agents back in the day working in the traditional insurance space, and I did not like it. But I've always been kind of a self-professed tech, privacy, cybersecurity junkie for most of my life. So when Reed and a friend of mine reached out about this role, I was like, no brainer, I'm in. So now I get to talk about passions and teach and educate and help people understand this fun, complex, crazy world that's always changing.
Yeah, and it is moving quickly, constantly. All right, so today's part 2. It's going to be on handling objections and cyber insurance 101. Dustin wanted to make sure we did discuss some things from last week that came to his mind, and we can address these first Will and Reed or last, depending on how you guys want to do them. But he did want to address, he sent me a note, why you want your clients to have a policy, what a cyber policy actually covers, because as we know, not all policies are created equal. There are varying degrees of coverages within them. And I think a lot of people don't understand that, what can and can easily get missed. And then what important one is what tech E&O is. So I just wanted to make notes of those for you, Reed and Will, and you guys take it from here. We can, like I said, we can start there, or we can start with part 2 and go from there.
Yeah, actually that's perfect, because the first part of part 2 actually covers that stuff anyway. So I think it's good to discuss, and it's also a reason I'm very glad Reed is on this call, because Reed is the kind of guy who has insurance policies on his nightstand next to his bed, and that's what he reads for fun. So he can talk about all that good stuff. And we're gonna actually start there. And Reed, and I mean, I know Andrew, you're always doing this, but if you can all monitor the chat, I'm gonna share my screen with the slides, so I'm not really gonna be able to see all that.
Sure.
So if any questions come up and all that good stuff, please.
Perfect.
And just that encouragement again from last week. If you have questions, no need to wait till the end. We'll try to get to them as they come up, because they're usually pretty relevant to what's happening. So I'm going to go ahead and share this out. We all see this?
We can.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So, part 1 is going to cover objections to cyber insurance. It's also going to touch some of those objections are around those exact questions. What should every client have a cyber insurance policy? What's on a comprehensive cyber insurance policy? Those kind of questions. The second half of today, we're going to look a little deeper into the security controls. And Andrew, I want to make this particular slide deck, we want to make available to everyone, because it's all white labeled, and you can use all of this as kind of notes for yourself on how to discuss these things with clients around cyber insurance. So I'll get that over to you after the class is over, but so we can send it out. But Reed, before we dive into this stuff, the one thing that's not on here is tech E&O. So can you talk a little bit about the difference between cyber liability as a whole, and then what tech E&O is on top of that?
Sure. And forgive me if I get too insurance-y. I've learned to try to pump it back a bit. So I'll keep this high level. So we're going to learn more about cyber liability insurance here in a bit. So we'll cover that on kind of the end client side. But when we talk about tech E&O, what we're talking about is the coverage that...
Can someone mute Andy, I think.
Sorry.
Good deal. So for tech E&O, that's specifically the coverage for, case in point, for you as an MSP, so your business. Why that's different and why it's important to have a tech E&O policy versus just a cyber policy is tech E&O is actually protecting you and your liability against its errors and omissions, really. So if there was what could be perceived even as an error or omission from the service you're providing, and that's the dangerous piece of it, is it starts based off of perception. You can have a customer that says, hey, maybe we experienced an event, maybe we experienced downtime, whatever it may be. It's very easy for them to derive this is your fault. This was due to your omission of something or your error. So it's protecting you, it's providing the services for defense and all that good stuff. But the modern day tech E&O policy also includes cyber. Okay, so that's the important piece is if you're talking to an agent and say, hey, you need cyber, you need tech E&O. Well, no, there's products now that include both. So it protects you and yours, which is your first party, right? That's your business. You as a business, not just as an MSP, but you have exposure when it comes to cyber, just like everybody else. That protects you. Your additional exposure is the services that you provide to your end client, and that's what the tech E&O piece is doing. So kept it very high level, and if there's any questions, happy to go into detail, but just so we kind of, again, high level, separate the two policies and understand the difference. There we go. Thanks, Adam. Yeah, and there's across the pond, certainly there's different definitions even here in the US on the types of coverages, the modules of coverage, but then you go into other countries and even the policies themselves have different labels, different titles.
And it's not to say that you wouldn't, as an MSP, still have things in cyber like business resumption for yourself or anything like that have, you know, if you're broke, you know, you have a Buffalo jump or if you go down, it's just to say, hey, there's a chance your customer has an incident, their breach attorney reaches out and they start talking and go, well, this is your fault. It's going to kind of be that umbrella of like, hey, you know, we know you're suing me, but we've got some backdrop to protect me.
Exactly. If it's tied to the services you provide, if that's the accusation, then absolutely. Just speaking of Buffalo jump, we're going to get into this later. When we talk about exposure, so we say, in other ways, how is my business at risk? And if you have a good risk advisor, a good agent, that should be what they should be assessing with you regularly, right? They should be talking through, what does my exposure look like? Where are my risks and how am I mitigating, right? Am I transferring risk? Am I buying insurance? What am I doing? Data is one thing, the services you provide, but then also access. And that's become a really big thing. It's a third-party aspect to exposure, which is basically someone could just have utilized you. You know, if we're talking about a Buffalo jump, we're talking about systemic risk, but basically you were a pawn in the scheme of accessing someone else. You're still in the line of liability, right? And that's where we see a lot of litigation occur, where it's like, this technically is not due to my client's negligence. This is due to yours. And you should be responsible for the damages that they incurred.
Right. It's like 3CX isn't going to be, you know, exonerated because the North Koreans used one supply chain tool to get into them. They are going to be on the hook as that supply chain.
Yeah. And it's, you know, again, I'll try not to go too in the weeds here, but, you know, there's going to be, if it's a large scale event, there's going to be subrogation, there's going to be a lot of fingers pointed, but it's going to work its way upstream eventually, but you're still in that path, right? And you gotta, all that time and lawyering up is going to be expensive.
Sure. Two terms, and I'll let you guys get back on track. Read Buffalo jump. Maybe not everybody knows that.
Sure.
We obviously affectionately refer to Buffalo jumps. Talk to us about what a Buffalo jump is, and also talk to us about what subrogation is. Just
can you clear something up? Was it Wes that coined it?
Yes, he did. When we were working at Perch on go to market, and we did it was like the 2019 or 2020 threat report.
Okay,
is when we put it in there. So
I love it. I used that in front of a carrier once, and they just looked at me wide-eyed. So if I use the word systemic risk, it speaks their language. So what we're speaking to is, you know, there's a one-to-many. There is a, if you want to call it a lily pad effect or a spiderweb effect, but MSPs are ripe for the picking when it comes to, if I infiltrate one target, I then have access to many, right? You can balloon that up too and look at supply chain as well. And you look at very easy systemic events, right? It's a domino effect. And a Buffalo jump, what Wes was referring to, I think more affectionately, was the fact that you can have, you know, this event can easily jump from one target to another. And there was a big one that opened up eyes on the insurance side when Kaseya happened. That was kind of the, I'll say, nexus of where a lot of the scrutiny started looking at MSPs for the potential of that type of event, the potential of systemic risk.
yeah, awesome. And then subrogation, Reed.
Subrogation is when you have two carriers that basically are saying, no, you're responsible. No, you're responsible. And then you've got the Spider-Man meme. They're all pointing at each other. You've got coverages that may be overlapping, or you may have, we'll just call it for simplicity, the responsibility of one carrier versus another. So it's maybe your customer's coverage and your coverage, and the customer experiences a loss and that customer's carrier pays for it. But then the customer carrier, that carrier looks closer at it and they say, technically this should be on the MSP's policy. They're not going to go to you directly, right? And say, pay me my money. They are going to go to your carrier and say, hey, we should not have footed the bill here. And that's called subrogation. They're going to be working, quote unquote, together to figure out where these dollars and cents fall.
Super easy example here is like, let's say you're parked in a parking lot and someone hits your car. And so you have no fault in that accident because you were just parked, you weren't moving, but your carrier will pay your insurance claim, but then they're going to go after the other guy's insurance company to get their money back. So it's the same type. It's that type of approach.
Great.
Great
analogy.
my client wasn't at fault. I want my money back, you know, like that kind of thing. So they reach out to their carrier. So the other two questions you asked, one of them being who needs, you know, do all of my clients need cyber insurance? I mean, short answer is yes. We're going to get into that a little bit. And then what's on a true cyber insurance policy? We're going to cover all of that. And the first part of today is all about concerns and objections. And really, when you think about a client, if you're an MSP and you're talking to an end client, if you bring up cyber insurance, the first thing you're probably going to be met with is, I already have an agent. I already talked to someone about that. I don't really need to know any more about that. And one of the points I always bring up with MSPs in those conversations is that there are vastly different types of cyber insurance policies out there. There are these little, I call them dinky riders. They're these little things that are attached to a general liability policy that offer next to no coverage at all. There's warranties that exist on, like, sometimes you get them and it's like, hey, if you have a loss, we'll reimburse you for the loss up to a certain amount, but they're rife with all sorts of different exclusions. And then there's a comprehensive policy. So that right there poses an issue, because a client might be like, oh yeah, no, I have a cyber insurance policy. I'm good. And they might not actually be carrying anything that's going to help them in the midst of an incident. Now, why is this a problem? Well, for you as a cybersecurity professional, right? MSPs are concerned with both all the protection that is needed left of boom, but then if something does happen, we always say, right, it's not if, it's when. So when something does happen, we want to make sure that our clients are capable of surviving the blast. Can they weather the storm that is incident response? Because there's a lot more to it than the first thing they're thinking, hey, Mr. or Mrs. MSP, how fast can you get me back up online? When in reality, that's just a small piece of what incident response is. And we want to talk about that. So when we dive into some of these objections, the thought process here is it is wildly important that a client has the right type of coverage to fit their risk, because there are a lot of expenses that can be incurred. So Reed, I'm actually going to toss it to you to talk a little bit about who should have a cyber insurance policy. And if you bring this up with a client and they say, why are you talking to me about this? Why do I need cyber insurance? How do we kind of navigate that?
And let me add one piece to that too, because it was really well put. You're also considering this selfishly for your own reasons as an MSP, because their exposure is yours. So for the gaps that they may have coverage-wise is an opportunity for possibly them to look at having an incident and coming after you, right? Because if they're not made whole by their insurance carrier, they're going to look at their options. The lawyer's going to look at their options. And what we're seeing is the MSP ends up in the spotlight there. So when we talk about, all right, what does the cyber insurance actually do? We'll go into a little bit more details, but at a high level, even if we're not asking you, by the way, go out there and sling insurance. We're certainly not even asking you go out there and be knowledgeable to a degree, but just know that the value of insurance is really important. And at a high level, it's covering things that are typically overlooked, because whenever you go through an event, there is a path. I mean, depending on what actually occurred, all sorts of different things can come into play. But there is one consistent path. And if they start thinking about that consistent path, it goes, okay, these are expenses I was not really anticipating or thinking about. Legal and forensics are the two big ones that are really easy to bring up, where you can say, look, when an incident occurs right now, legal is going to get involved for various reasons. But if PII is exposed, there's, from a regulatory standpoint, you want to be informed. And most carriers, if not all carriers now, are involving legal at the front end for that very reason, and they want to establish attorney-client privilege. We all know attorneys aren't that cheap. Next, they need facts. They need information. They need to understand the who, what, where, when, why, how. So they're going to bring in forensics. Okay. I've seen forensics frivolously deployed. It's very frustrating, but it still ends up being kind of the basic process for a lot of these carriers. But nonetheless, it's a really important exercise, even if it's a minor breach, to understand what's actually in play. Again, very costly service. And then from there, it spans out. Right? We see kind of spiderweb out, and we're going to go through more and more detail. But if you just get folks thinking about the expenses of notification, if it's a big enough event, are we getting PR involved? Will you be responsible for credit monitoring or even fraud response? These are things that by state, by every state, there's a different requirement for what you are responsible for paying for. So just a quick exercise when you look at this. These are some of the small pieces, but I bring it up because we go through this all the time with end clients. And it's a piece that's often overlooked, right? They're not seeing it. They're more so seeing, oh, I go down, I got to be brought back up again. And that's your job, right? So you're going to you're going to do data recovery for me and then I'll be back up and running in no time because, we have backups, for example. No, it's not that simple. So that's just to kind of pull at the thread a little bit of what insurance is doing at the front end.
And talk about pressure sometimes as an MSP you'll get from clients like, oh, I don't need a cyber insurance policy. That's why I have you as my MSP. You're protecting me from any of this stuff happening in the first place. But as we've seen statistically, 82% of breaches are due to people clicking links they're not supposed to. And you may have great email filtering tools. You may have all sorts of things in place to try and stop those false emails or false messages from getting through, but that's not going to, you can't guarantee perfection. And a big piece of this here is, look, I can protect you from a lot, but I can't protect you from yourself. I mean, that's just the reality. So to make sure that they have that ability to weather their storm, it's not if, it's when. It's a really key concept. And people, there's also sometimes that misconception, oh, well, your policy covers me, right? It's like, no, that's not how this works. So it's, but again, to Reed's point, we don't want you to become experts, but we do want people to understand that a cyber insurance policy covers a lot more than, our incident response is a lot more than just get me back online. There are all these other pieces that can be important. So I'm going to cover a couple other of these misconceptions / objections you're going to hear. We have insurance. We don't need security. We'll just file a claim. I mean, this one is hilarious to me. Partially because I don't even think it's on here, but something to keep in mind, if they have a policy and they don't have good security, that should be a flag to you right now that it's not a good policy. Because this, 5 years ago, this might have been the case. But today, if a client is saying, hey, look, I don't need to implement all this security you're recommending for me because I already have a policy which will just cover things. I'll file a claim when things happen. That claim is probably going to get denied, or it's not going to pay out very much, because that means that they either don't have a good policy, or they lied on all the answers on the application. So they have a good policy, but forensics is going to determine, oh, you're a bunch of liars and you don't have the controls you say you did. So this leads to a bunch of issues. So I know that's not on the slide specifically, but that is like the red flag that pops up, is if they're denying security and saying, I'll just file a claim, that should be a flag for you that they're not actually protected by insurance in that moment.
And Ben, as a comment, that if they say that, run from them and run fast. Probably pretty accurate. It might be a tall mountain to climb when it comes to going through that objection, but these requirements aren't going away. They're actually getting more and more robust.
And a better and possibly a better way to address this, folks, is, and we don't want to be adversarial, but a better way is to, in essence, do a mini tabletop with them. Say, hey, look, that it's interesting. You're not the only one that's ever said that to me. Is it possible that we could get your insurance broker in the room or on the phone and walk through a few scenarios? For example, you have a business email compromise, MFA isn't in place, you lose $500,000. We talked about having an EDR. You don't want to do that. We talked about having security awareness training. You don't want to do that. And this is the type of compromise you have. What would happen? And so we're basically doing a tabletop with them. Would you be willing to do that so that firsthand from your insurance broker, would that in fact be the case? Would you be made whole by not doing these things? Because wouldn't you rather know now versus if it happened, what would the result be?
If I may, Andrew, just a comment to that, because I think it's really good to go through an exercise to better understand what they understand, right? And part of that too is, Andrew made a comment earlier, not all insurance policies are created equal. Well, guess what? Same with insurance brokers, okay? We're living in a day and age where this is, a huge demand for cyber insurance. That's great, but you have very unequipped folks that are advising them on this subject. Trust me, I can say this factually because we work with thousands upon thousands of them across the country, and we have to do their job for them. Essentially, we have a account management team that does this. So the information that these clients are getting just may not be even misinformation. They're just not getting anything at all. No one's actually taking the time to sit with them and understand what this is and what this is not. So it is a good opportunity to go through that exercise. And It's all for the better, right? A rising tide, so to speak. We want to make sure that awareness level can go up.
Right. Absolutely. It's almost like, if we use that, Andy, you were talking about health earlier. A lot of times we think our healthcare coverage, right, takes care of all these things. It's like, okay, well, God forbid, when I typically go, it's $30 or $60 for my copay, but we don't realize hypothetically that in the event I had surgery, emergency surgery, I had to go to the emergency room first and and had an ambulance. Oh, by the way, that first $10,000 is coming out of your pocket? No, I had no idea. Yeah, your policy doesn't cover this beginning portion until you get about here, and then it kicks in. And so it's very much, I think, this misnomer that there's a lot of misconception, a lot of misinformation. But again, try not to, I think there's various ways and shapes and forms we can help them feel okay that they're not the only ones to think that that's the way it works.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Andy, did you have a question? I see your hand
I
raised.
do. And can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
The question is, if we're doing this kind of mock tabletop exercise and we're expressing to them, you really need to get this, what is the stopping point so that we don't take liability on making a recommendation on a type of coverage? So we could say, I can't work with you as one because you don't have insurance. And they're going to say, well, tell us what we need to get. And if I go through this tabletop exercise and say, this is all the different things you need to have covered, where does it end for me? Where do I have to stop to say, you know what? This is something you need to talk to someone else about.
Yeah.
That's a really good question.
I would recommend, to what Andrew said before, I would recommend asking to bring the broker into that conversation rather than you trying to do that yourself, where you could pose the scenario and then the broker would be able to explain how the policy covers it. Hopefully the policy does cover it, but I would, yeah.
I'll use this as an opportunity to elevate what we do in our process, which is basically we'll take on, like when we do this, Fifth Wall does this, and we interact with MSPs to engage on clients. What we recommend is you are bringing this up to form a level of awareness. You are not telling them specifically the coverage they should have, what are the limits, but you are going through an exercise to see, again, do you understand what they understand to a degree? Do they know if they have good coverage? Have they talked to their broker? Have they gone through this exercise? Okay. It's really important to me because your exposure is my exposure. And also this is just really good risk management, right? It's part of the response and recovery that you understand your coverage. So if you haven't gone through that, it's important to either do that with your broker or I can connect you with someone that does this.
The question, and that would be,
sure,
in this relationship between a client and the MSP, if the client isn't insured and they're limiting what we could potentially do for them, it's almost like we're living with someone with TB or something, right? Because they're going to they're infected and they could potentially infect us or others, and the risk kind of balloons. Is that a way to interpret this relationship and lack of safety?
View it your level of risk. That's what we're talking about, right? So safety, risk, if we want to use that interchangeably. And how much is their level of risk affecting your level of risk? Go ahead, Andrew, you had a comment?
Yeah, a few things that I want to point out, Andy, and for everybody. Number one, do not, you might say in your MSA, we require cyber insurance. Do not put how much ever.
Yeah.
That's number one. Number two, again, that's where Reed and Will come in, right? This is their domain to say, based on their payroll, their organization, and their risk tolerance, what their coverage should be. That's number one. Number two, in terms of why it's, when you think about your business, Andy, you've got to think about how the process works. And I'll hand this back to Reed. In the event your client has cyber insurance, in the event they have an incident, the first call once that incident is reported is the quarterback in this whole thing is a breach attorney. And the breach attorney, we either can work well with a breach attorney as MSPs, or we can be adversarial. The latter I would not recommend. But at the end of the day, if that customer doesn't have a good policy, they're going to, as we all know, insurance companies don't want to pay out. So someone is going to, so they're going to look at you. Hey, Andy, why didn't you do this? Hey, Andy, why didn't they have that? Well, I told them. So, right, Breed, maybe just talk about how the quarterback works here and what their job is to protect that insurance company.
Yeah, you've got a situation you don't, I want to go back real quick, Andy, to your initial comment of, is they kind of become a safety risk to you? And the short is yes, but how do you want to handle that? And what is the proper way that you can not accidentally put yourself in additional liability, right? And additionally expose yourself into this equation. So anytime there is a breach, legal is involved. That's what carriers do. It's now part of the rubber stamp of the process. So there's going to be thorough due diligence, thorough review on this, that, or the other. Whenever you're looking at your risk and you're thinking, all right, what is this risk and how do I handle this risk? That is where you want, it should be your agent, candidly. This is, in today's day and age, this is the conversation you should be able to have, a mature conversation with your agent to say, hey, agent, do your job. I need you to help me understand how I manage this risk and what are my options, okay? And are my options, do I need to build something additionally into my MSA, right? But Andrew brought up a really good point. No way, shape, or form should you be making specific recommendations, especially in writing, right? But you can put baseline requirements of what you want to see. You want to see them carry cyber, and then you're going to have a third party do due diligence to determine whether or not it's adequate. So it's kind of it's a little too open-ended, but it's one of those, you do need to have somebody specifically talk to you about how you can mitigate that risk if legitimately you're viewing. Yeah.
May I ask one final question?
Sure.
It almost seems like we need to know what could potentially be on an incident response back to an attorney to check off the boxes with a prospective customer to say, I recommended this, you declined it on this day. I recommended this, you took action on it this day. Here's our artifact that shows continual vulnerability assessments, and this is, all those pieces. That kind of a checklist would be really helpful in this process.
Yeah, you can have, in our world, we call it, we try to get declinations from clients to protect our E&O. So if we've talked about a topic and they have said no to it, like the coverage, big thing for cyber right now is, I talked to you about cyber, you said no, I need you to sign this so it actually is documented that you said no. Because there's going to be a time when you get hit and then you're going to say, I didn't do my job, right? So very similar, that's what it sounds like. Are there checkboxes? And that is certainly something you want to get an actual attorney around, a breach attorney. And I know Andrew knows many great ones that he's had on before when it comes to what does that process need to look like, right? And what are the boxes that I want to make sure are checked, and how should that be worded to my client?
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Awesome. Now, kind of working through this some more, we don't really need to go into all of this specifically, but because costs of claims are all over, or costs of policies are all over the place right now, I think something that's really important here is if they say we'll just file a claim, to Andrew's point before, carriers don't want to have to pay if they don't have to, right? So they're gonna honor their contract, but they have lawyers that pour through the contract to make sure that the situation fits what the contract says it's going to cover. But on top of that, if there are open claims, and this is a huge piece of it, is if they have an open claim, I can speak from experience here, meaning the claim has not fully been resolved, hasn't been fully paid out, all that kind of stuff. They're going to have a really hard time getting renewed. They're going to have a really hard time finding a different policy. Other carriers aren't going to want to write it because, and it just creates a lot more headache and hassle. So you don't want, there's two sides to this. One, carriers don't want to have to pay they don't want to have to pay, but on this side, you don't want to have to file a claim. Insurance isn't something you want to have to use. So if they're saying, we'll just file a claim if this happens, it's like, you should never want to even get to that spot.
Well, can I throw in, there's a third piece.
Yeah.
And I would argue, Andy and everybody listening, possibly the most important. When you hear we'll just file a claim, the important piece here to me is, well, that's fine. Let's say you do that. But let's say you're down. Can we talk about your business? Forget me for a second. I don't exist. You're down. Talk about the business. Do you have customers that are upset? Do you have services that are not being delivered? Do you have supply chain risks to your customers? Are you losing money? What about paying your people? What about if payroll's tomorrow? Forget the fact that you're going to file a claim. Let's say you get whole in 4 weeks. I'm going to agree with you. You're fine, but you're down for 2 weeks. Your business is okay. Like, again, you got to walk them through the tabletop.
Yeah.
Right. Jim, your business is down. Chip, your business is down. You guys can't code. You guys can't service customers for 2 weeks. How's that going for SaaS loads?
Not great.
Yeah. Let's,
Right?
Andrew, how about you don't even put that thought out to the universe?
Yeah, sorry, Chip. But you know what I'm saying? It's silly. Like, think about it. It's, you know, I'll use a Gary Pica term. It's preposterous. Who you think about your MSP then? Okay, I'm down for 2 weeks, but I got an insurance cut. I got an insurance policy. I'll just file a claim. Your customers aren't upset though, are they, that you can't provide them any service? They're fine, right?
There's no amount of money out there that covers the opportunity costs.
Yeah.
It's idiotic. You're not going to have any reputational issues with your customers. They're going to trust you wholeheartedly, right? There's no problems that you can't service them. Really?
Yeah.
It's the stupidest thing ever. You obviously can't say that to them. I'd like to say that to them, but walk them through, get away from the engagement of we'll just file a claim. Walk them through what happens.
Yeah,
Yep.
I think that's great, doing a tabletop kind of thing. And to your point, Andrew, I think, you know, Reed, maybe you could talk through some of this here. You see things on a policy like reputational damage. You see things like public relations and dependent network interruption. There's like these coverages, but to Jim's point, those are monetary, right? There is a piece of this where it's like, look, insurance is going to step in and help you recoup damages, but they're not going to actually solve the problems. And that those things cost money, but your reputation will hurt from this.
The other thing that, again, this person isn't, you know, they're not going to understand to say, look, you file a claim. Okay, let me walk you through the process. You've got, let's just say it's a health care provider. Just let's role play here. And there's PII, PHI. All right. First of all, they're not going to want to do anything until that forensic group's, they're not going to want you up and running.
Yep.
They're going to want you down because guess what? Regulators are coming in. Regulatory fines are coming your way. All these other things. Like, you got to just take this stupid notion of we'll file a claim away and have them experience, walk them through that it's not the way the process works.
Yeah. And I'm going to use that as because it's very similar to when we're just talking about insurance in general and walking a client through. The best way I have found to explain their exposure is I walk through the coverages. I'm not saying this is not something you should do, but I'm just saying from my standpoint, I kind of take it is a form of a tabletop. I walk through and say, hey, this is what a policy, a comprehensive one, mind you, is meant to do. And when we go through that, they go, oh, wait a minute, I didn't think about that scenario. Because each one really is a scenario. Business interruption, there's a scenario. Fines and penalties, there's a scenario, right? And that is what really elevates awareness. And they go, okay, I'm seeing this differently. Because before I thought it was just, you know, protecting my computers or whatever they think this actually is. And to Andrew's point, yeah, you can get a check written for all these things, but it does not solve your problem, right? Money does not. It's a Band-Aid for a bullet hole when it comes to your reputation.
Literally,
right?
literally a Band-Aid for a bullet hole.
So let's not even go there. We don't have to. Actually, let's be aware that this is eventually going to happen, but rather than it being a big blast, it's going to be a tiny little firecracker, okay? Because that's how good we are. That's how we're going to handle this. Did I see, do you have an additional question? I saw your hands up. I just want to make sure we hit these. You're still on mute, my friend.
When I look at this, I just learned that the average breach in 2022 was $1.8 million. And this is limits of aggregate total of $1 million. How is this even adequate to cover the costs of something?
So yeah, let's do this then. So this is what is cyber insurance really? And I'm going to hit this really high level to answer your question. Because you guys did not come onto this webinar to become experts in the coverage, but I do want you to understand the essence of what this is. Because does it pay claims? Yes, it does. Well, I heard it doesn't. Well, then they were looking at the wrong product. How do we get the right product, right? Well, who are you working with? What access they have, so on and so forth. So this is the aggregate limit, Andy. So we're looking at this as $1 million policy. So if I were talking to a business that I knew legitimately had the potential of hitting $1.8 million on average, then we should have had a 2 million aggregate limit conversation, or a 5 million, or a 10 million. This is where talking to a good risk advisor about understanding what their exposure is and then lining that up to the coverage they should be holding, it's an important exercise, right? And if they didn't have that, they could be very underinsured, but also we've seen instances where folks are overinsured. They're carrying a $5 million policy and their revenues don't even exceed, $4 million a year. And we're going, what's the scenario here? Their agent oversold them. So yeah, this is example right here is just on $1 million limit policy, but you can certainly go up, Andy. And that 1.8 million stat, a lot of the statistics that we're getting still, there's not enough from the SMB market that are influencing it, but it's happening more and more every day. A lot of it is from the enterprise space that's influencing that. So we're seeing in the SMB market, it's still between 2 to 300K, depending on the incident on average. But that sways based on industry. I mean, it's a really hard thing to pinpoint. But we look at the coverage, right? We're saying, all right, what is it covering? We'd already talked about first and third party liability. We're talking about fines and penalties. Believe it or not, yeah, if you are liable, if it's PHI, if it's PCI information, whatever it may be, and you are then exposed to regulatory fines, yes, this policy will pay those fines in full up to the limit. All the crisis services that I mentioned previously on that slide for forensics, PR, legal, all the third parties that need to come in and get involved to help solve this. These are a lot of hard costs. We also get into some soft costs, okay? And these are the things that I think are a little bit more interesting to talk about. Again, you're not making recommendations. You're not saying you need this, but you can ask the question, have you thought about your business interruption, right? You're down for 2 weeks. What happens? How much money are you losing? If you're just looking at revenue, right? You're not even looking at soft costs on reputational damage or opportunity cost. What does that look like? Well, guess what? Those are all dollars and cents you can accumulate and then file a claim for, and you can be made whole. We look at reputational damage as one that's always often overlooked, that slow burn afterwards. I mean, talk about a big issue that you really can't pinpoint ahead of time in advance. Can you really honestly say what it's going to look like after your business experiences that event, and potentially how that impacts your current clients and renewing those clients, let alone prospecting and bringing new clients in because you just had a breach? Again, there's sales numbers, there's opportunities that are lost that you can derive to then file a claim for. And then we get into a lot of the hardware costs, replacing hardware, dependent network interruption, which is if you have a third party that goes down, like an internet service provider, cloud storage. Yes, you have business interruption because of that. You can file a claim. Cryptojacking, invoice manipulation, which we see a lot now. It's basically it's like the third party social engineering. A false invoice is sent out, right, from your business. It goes to a second business. They pay that invoice and they're going, well, what the heck, man? I thought that was legitimate. I'm out 50K. And you're like, well, that wasn't my fault. Well, technically it was. You didn't stop it from happening. So, insurance will cut a check for that 50K. And then you get into the crime coverages, which I think is a lot more common. We're talking about electronic theft, social engineering, ransomware. We all know what that is. These are things that whenever someone is either manipulated or it's just a hard, this is highway robbery, someone is stealing funds, insurance is going to pay those funds directly back. So when you look at this, you hopefully see, okay, this is getting a lot of the scenario, a lot of the equation in considering the large equation when it comes to keeping a business whole. But we don't always see this, right? Most of the time, and I'm saying 60, maybe 70% of the time, if we're reviewing a policy, we're seeing, well, it's covering your liability and it's covering forensics, but it's also sublimiting forensics to $10,000. or $5,000. And at that point, we're going, this is kind of a useless policy. And I don't know why your agent sold it to you. Versus, I don't know how this is going to play out, but there's a lot of different ways. Let's go through that. So now you can understand why you need a very comprehensive policy that's looking at all the parts and pieces. All right. Well, I'm off of my insurance coverage soapbox, so we can move on, unless there's any specific questions.
Andrew's got something.
Yeah, I just wanted to see, Will, is it possible that we could take a pause here and give Jim and team some time to jump back to Unify, and we could pick this up in week 3?
Yeah. Can I just say one last piece here? Just to address what Andy asked before. Take 1 second here. Andy, you were talking about looking at this number, 1 million limits, things like that. And then Reed explained like, hey, look, in the small business market, we're seeing this, we're seeing that. And just like you as an MSP are going to look at your client and say, what is your exposure? I need to protect the holes. I need to protect the gaps that I see. In the same way, a broker who understands cyber is going to come in and look at it and say, what is this industry? What is their size? What's their need? And they're going to come in, and a policy should fit the specific risk. You shouldn't just see a blanket thing that fits. You shouldn't say, oh, everyone should just have 1 million. This is to Andrew's point before. Avoid specific numbers, because when you put a number in there, every client's just going to do that and nothing more, even if they need more, right? Whereas if you say, look, I really think you should have a comprehensive policy, talk to someone to understand your risk better. It's that kind of thing. So yeah, Andrew, we can totally pick this up next week. We're going to cover the other half next week.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad, Reed, you gave that example as I hand this over to Jim and Chip. I'm glad you gave that example of the 5,000 for forensics. I mean, forensics is about a $600 an hour type business. So if you just do the math real quick, but those are the stories you can use, right? You're not saying I'm suggesting limits, but say, look, I've seen insurance companies provide, policies where there's $5,000 in forensics. Let me just kind of give you a sense of how much forensic work you'll typically see if this happens, right? And that's why I want to bring somebody in to make sure it's concern versus, anyway. Jim, what do you got for us? Let's talk.
Okay, so the last 9.5 minutes here, we're going to kind of come back to Unify. We do have a hard stop at 2:00 Eastern time today. So I saw before when we asked a question, there's definitely some folks that missed out on Unify yesterday. So what I want to do is take a little time here, and for those that did miss it, just highlight what Unify is, and then have Adam Steinhoff come in and talk a little bit about it for those, and answer any questions that folks have. So first of all, we did record yesterday's session. There is a press cycle going on for next Wednesday when we announce this to the rest of the universe. And so we're holding that recording that we did yesterday until next Wednesday. So we will send it out, but it won't be till next Wednesday. Okay, so you will have it, but just want to make sure we're clear on those expectations. And first of all, thanks to the guys at Fifth Wall. You guys are awesome, and looking forward to having you guys back again next week. So Unify. I mentioned yesterday, look, there's a lot of marketing hyperbole that goes on in the marketplace. And, the first, the only, I can confidently say that Unify is the first and only of its kind in this ecosystem, where we are leveraging the existing RMM agent. Right now, it's VSA, it's ConnectWise, Automate, and it's Ninja. We're leveraging those agents. We're collecting the data from the devices being monitored by those agents, and we are correlating it with the SaaS account information, and being able to leverage Respond automated remediation version 3 to be able to create specific rules around how to remediate the issues that come in from the collection of that data. So I'm going to hand it over to Adam here the last 7 minutes and just give you guys a real high level of it, and then take any questions. And we can certainly pick any of this back up next week as well. So Adam is former MSP. For those that don't know, he is he's a leader of our MSP tools division on the product management side, and has done a fantastic job getting us to Unify. Adam.
Hey, thank you for the intro. I guess I'll just share my screen and I'll show, because sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. So let me find my right screen for this. I think we got me there. Okay. So the big thing to notice with Unify is that we have added a device column here, which you all have probably never seen before. And trying to zoom in, there we go. This device column will tell us some interesting things, but to keep it short and concise, the very interesting thing comes around the fact that we are now knowing with a certainty, or a certain certainty, that the actions that are being performed by the users are in fact happening from their device that is registered in the RMM that has been mapped to that particular account. So in this particular instance, you can see my account logged in from this particular IP, and we have a 66% confidence rating that it was done from my MacBook Pro. And that's because we are actually pulling the data out of the RMM, comparing it to the event data that we're getting, and making sure that logic says that this device is happening, or this device is causing the activity. So on this one, the IP address, public IP address from the event matches the public IP address from the agent on my laptop. The operating system is 100% match. And the email address, Adam @ matches the username that is on my personal laptop, 45%. And the email address matches the name of my laptop by 65%. And therefore, we're throwing up a confidence score of 66%. The flip side to this is we now actually can pull needles out of a haystack as soon as I find one of those haystacks. There we go. So this is an event where I logged in, same city, so impossible travel wouldn't make a difference. And it would normally be called a low event because I authenticated. I knew my username, knew my password, knew my MFA token. But aha, the event IP address does not match the IP address that was on my device at that particular time. So we're able to now flag that these events are not occurring on those users' devices. So the other kind of cool thing here is now that we know this information, we can do some pretty cool things with Respond that we were not able to do before. By the way, we have Respond v3 that got released as well yesterday, which for one of the things adds this little filter here that says, hey, I'm not only going to look at what event occurred, but now I actually want to drill into some of the data that's coming out of those events. And part of that are these new Unify properties. So I can test that this logon happened, and I'm checking to see if the user has mapped devices. I'm checking to see if there's enough data in the event that Unify can do the magic that it does. I'm going to go ahead and exclude mobile OS for right now. And then I'm going to test to see if the confidence level on that event is less than 50%. And if that's the case, then I know that this logon, which normally would be a low-level, no big deal login because it was successful, is now a problem because it's happening on a device that is not my device. So at a nutshell, very, very high level, that's what it is. The other piece to this is the actual mapping process that we've made pretty easy. So today, there really hasn't been a way to go like this device is this user's very easily. So because we have the event data and we have the RMM data now, we're doing the same comparison that we are on the events, and we're actually suggesting which account owns that device. So in this instance, Adam's MacBook Pro, it's suggesting two accounts. One is me, one is my wife. We happen to work from the same house with the same public IP on the same type of laptop. So she's getting a 50% rating. Whereas I'm getting a 64 because my device username and my device name actually matches my account name. Whereas in her instance, just the IP and just the OS matched. The username did not. So because of that, I'm more certain. I'm going to go ahead and map that laptop to that user. Same thing with Ryan here. And then again, same thing with Ryan here. And now I've mapped those devices and the magic that is Unify has been turned on. So I think I did a 30-minute presentation in 4 minutes there, Jim. I'll stop sharing now and answer any questions that you may have, or you can direct me where I need to go next.
Okay, so I'll just say this before we close out, and we can answer, we can take questions next week on it. We've been answering some here in the chat. If you want to start testing this, just reach out to your account manager. Dana, Connor, Alex, just go ahead, reach out to them. They can get you hooked up. And also, I want to point out in the chat, Amy put in here a survey, okay? That would be extremely helpful for us, for you to fill out. It will help us understand where the learning gaps are with respect to what you know around SaaS alerts, and help us better prioritize our roadmap on a go-forward basis. So if you could take just 5 minutes to fill that out, that would be greatly appreciated. If you don't fill it out, then you can probably expect your account manager to hound you about it in the days and weeks to come. So with that, we're at the top of the hour. Again, I want to thank Fifth Wall for doing a fantastic job. Looking forward to coming back next week for the third and final session around cyber insurance. And for those that are going to Vegas next week for Kaseya Connect, look forward to seeing you there. Definitely come by the booth and say hi. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Take care.